In this lecture, we will be looking specifically at crime in the United States, how it relates to and fits into the author's thesis about crime in the American dream. Some of the questions that the authors ask, this is a lot coming from the Politics of Injustice text. Is crime really higher than ever? Is crime on the rise? Is our problem worse than any other countries? Why is it so bad in the good old US of A? Is the CJA system growing? Is the CJA system effective? Each of these issues requires complex consideration. It's going to require complex answers and solutions. There's not any sort of silver bullets that are going to knock out any of these questions, but it's going to require a multidisciplinary approach. Some of the common, attractive, simple answers: decaying morals, evil, self-absorbed people, poverty, urban unrest, lenient courts, and spineless legislatures are just not the case. The issues that we have, again, are very complex. They're going to require a complex approach to address any of them. Some of the things that we look at to sort of figure out where we're at in terms of crime data: self-report surveys from high crime populations, that's either convicted offenders or juvenile males, so 15 to 19, a lot of high school related studies. We also look at observational data, where that can be collected in observing areas where high crime activity is known to take place. The major sources that we have are official crime stats coming from the FBI, the Uniform Crime Report, which is a conglomeration of the crime reporting from local police sent to the FBI, and they conglomerate it. We also have victimization reports, where individuals, it's sponsored by the government, will contact people and ask them about their victimization over the period of the last 6 months. They do this for 4 to 5 6-month periods, and again, the reports are collected to be able to estimate how much crime is actually taking place in the overall population, sampling this subset of about 100,000 people. There are some issues comparing these two numbers. They don't necessarily measure the same things. Basically, the UCR says crime is here, the NCVS says it's here, and we really think it to be here. So neither one of them is actually extremely accurate in predicting the actual level of crime, but looked at over time, they're very impactful in looking at changes. So even though the actual rate of robbery, for instance, recorded in the UCR in 1960 is lower than the actual number of robberies that took place, when we look at the rate of robbery and how, the level of robbery, how it moved from 1960 to 1970, we can get a good estimation of the change. Is it going up or is it going down? Some of the numbers coming from the two reports. The purple on both graphs is the violent crime. As you can see, it's relatively low compared to property crime, and it is trending, flat, relatively stable over this entire period. A little bit more fluctuation in the property crime, although it is going down on both sides from left to right. It's more of an extreme dip in the NCVS numbers than in the UCR numbers. So we have the UCR just about a little less than 100 years of that. And we have about 60 years of the NCVS, but we don't really have any good numbers before that, just sort of piece together statistics about how frequently crime occurred before then. But even with that minimal amount of information, today's society is much less violent than it had been in the past. In the past, in the American history or in European history as well, for many people that are from the United States, can trace their lineage back through Europe or other parts of the world as well, experience much higher rates of violent crime in the past than in modern times. So we see property crime peak in the late 70s. We saw on the graph before. It's been dropping since then, as there's been more advances in uh, cataloging things, serial numbers, GPS tracking, things of that nature have really reduced a lot of the crime that can take place. Now, obviously there are criminals that are evolving with that, but we have seen a large reduction. Violent crime peaking in the 1980s, small upticks in the 1990s, but overall it's been down a lot over the course of the period we're looking at here, so 1970s to present. The exception is drug crime. So drug crime has been going up and up and up. Partly is because we keep defining more crimes as drug related. They keep developing new drugs. At some point, though, we have to look at it and see that maybe this is not a criminal justice issue. Maybe this is a public health issue. Maybe something that could be better addressed by another governmental operation, because it's the police have been doing a very I don't want to criticize the work that they've done in the way that they've conducted it. They've just been asked to do a shitty job, and there's not really any way to succeed in that job. So they've been given a poor task, and their performance has reflected not their ability, but has reflected the illogical nature of the task that they've been assigned. Some more recent findings again show decreases in crime, drops pretty much across the board in both the NCVS and the UCR. You look at the property crime figures, estimates from 2011 to 2015, it drops off from over 9 million to right at 8 million. This is a chart looking at the clearance rates for crimes. Clearance rate means that either the offender is arrested or the police know who the offender is and they can't arrest him for some out of their hands reason. The person's dead, the person has fled the jurisdiction, something of that nature. The crime that is most commonly cleared is murder, non-negligent manslaughter. One way to look at that is that about 2/3 of murders are solved. The other way to look at it is that 1/3 of murders are not solved. And depending on how much of a gambler you are, that's how you could interpret those findings. It's important to note here, though, one of the lowest cleared crimes, motor vehicle theft, is one of the highest reported crimes. The reason for that is that you have to make a report if you want to get if you want to claim car insurance. So we're seeing, though, that even though it's going down, violent crime is a problem. You see these rates of violent offending. This is 2015 data. It's difficult to say that it's an uncommon phenomenon to have visited upon you, but it's a lot of these are happening. Estimates the NCVS saw we see about 5 million violent victimizations in 2015. It's almost 2% of the population is a victim of violent crime. That's a considerable amount. Property crime again is a problem. It's not necessarily it's not going up. It's going down, but there are a lot of these things taking place. You see, the UCR estimates about $18 billion in property losses in 2008. And I mean, it's only going up as we see more tech crimes, things like that happen. People losing money, scams through phones. There's a lot of property crime that is taking place. And also, again, compared to violent crime, property crimes are rarely cleared. Drug crime is a problem. About 40% almost of Americans admit to using some illegal drug in their lifetime. This numbers are sort of changing with the mixed legal status of marijuana, because as you can see, the most common illegally used drug is marijuana. At almost 3 times the rate of cocaine, 10 times the rate of heroin. But there's a lot of those drugs being used. So that's current users. We see about 6.3% of Americans, with about 1 million Americans being current users of heroin, 3 million being cocaine. So that's effectively 1% of the population admits to being a current cocaine user. It's an expensive endeavor. We spend a lot of money fighting this. Almost $28 billion in 2015 just for federal spending. In addition, people spend a lot of their money on this. So we're spending a lot of tax money on something that people are continuing to spend billions of dollars a year to procure. So it's a lot of resources from a lot of different angles being funneled into this one issue. There's also the problem of white-collar offending. White-collar offending doesn't mean corporate offending. It just means offending happening at the workplace. It could be McDonald's. It could be Walmart. It could be a local city council. It could be a major corporation. It's basically just any crime that happens at the job where the job plays a central role. And billions of dollars a year are lost to the large-scale corporate offending, but a lot of sort of negative attention goes towards the smaller scale offending, and sometimes it's stealing, but it could be doctoring food. For example, there is a if you like Rice Krispie Treat cereal, don't watch the video. But there's a guy in a plant that works in the factory urinating on the product as it goes down the line. And the video wasn't made public until about 6 months after it had been recorded. Or if there was an incident that happened here in Brookhaven where a Starbucks employee went on social media and claimed that she had put blood in customers' orders. So it's not always a massive economic impact, but when you see things like that, it has a negative impact on people's perceptions of the company. It can have wide-ranging impacts for the company and for the individual person themselves. I don't know exactly what happened in either of those particular cases, if they were facing any criminal charges, but if you pee on the line of the Rice Krispie Treat cereal, I feel like you should go to prison for that one. This crime is a problem in Atlanta. We see a fair amount of violent crimes, of homicides. So Atlanta has about half a percentage of all U.S. murders, but the area that it takes up is so much smaller. Again, evidence of high crime, particularly high murder rates, being concentrated in large cities. It's important to note also that 70% of arrestees test positive for a drug in Atlanta, whether that's cocaine or marijuana, are the two most common ones. There is some overlap, though, which is why the numbers aren't exactly 100%. Why do we have this problem? Why do any major cities have this problem? There's a lot of issues that come with people living in close proximity to one another. There's theories that have looked at different aspects of it. But it's just kind of one of those things that crime seems to go hand in hand with increased civilization. Some of the impacts that this has, having crime concentrated in these areas creates fear, anger, frustration. So that's part of the reason why crime does concentrate in these areas, in particular areas of a city like Atlanta. There are parts of the city that have very high crime, parts of the city that have relatively low crime. When you have this generational economic depression, whether it be because of market forces or whether it be artificially in place because of institutional systematic racism, it makes for areas where crime is more likely to take place, because areas where people are afraid to walk alone at night. Some places where people are afraid to be in their own homes, people expecting to be the victims of a crime, sort of living in fear of being the victim of a crime. It doesn't promote social cohesion or social participation. This process, again, creates these sort of inner city war zones where you have a very large reduction in social services, hearing gunshots, not only seeing the police to come in and arrest community members, or in some cases assault community members. It can be very detrimental for any attempts to try to better those individuals, or attempts by those individuals to better their neighborhoods. There's not any time or want for people to participate in the neighborhoods. It's just basically trying to survive. Okay, so take the what we read and contextualize that again with the things that we talked about here. Some of those numbers. We get some of the numbers and how they've changed over time. If you would like to look up any specific years for the UCR or the NCBS, all information is available online. So feel free to check that out. Then that we'll move on with the next PowerPoint. We'll be looking specifically at murder in the United States.